He built a career around one question. What do people truly deserve when they break a family's rules, or a community's? He wrote about mercy. He wrote about vengeance. He wrote about how far loved ones will go to protect each other. He never imagined he was writing his own fate. On a quiet Friday in a peaceful Tallahassee neighborhood, a law professor sat in his car inside his garage, still warm from a workout, and thinking of the two little boys he'd pick up from preschool that afternoon. He didn't know he'd been watched for weeks. He didn't know the people who wanted him gone were closer than he could have guessed. This is the story of Dan Markel, a devoted father, a marriage that unraveled, and a murder that took more than a decade, 5 convictions, and a devastating family betrayal to fully expose. Dan Markel was a law professor at Florida State University, raised in a Jewish household in Toronto after being born in Montreal. He built an impressive academic career through Harvard, Cambridge, and back to Harvard for his law degree, becoming known as brilliant and demanding in his field. But none of that defined him as much as fatherhood did. He married Wendi Adelson, a woman from a wealthy South Florida family, and they had 2 sons. Dan became a constant presence in his boys' lives, showing up at preschool, calling every night he traveled. That devotion would end up mattering more than anyone could have predicted. Wendy's family was unlike most. Her mother, Donna, was the emotional center of the household, and relatives later described the Adelsons as an unusually close, almost insular unit, where major decisions ran through her first. Wendy's father and brother were both dentists in the family practice. On the surface, Dan and Wendi looked like a natural match, 2 accomplished people building a life in the same small college town. But underneath, Wendi felt lonely in the marriage, and Dan's intensity, an asset in his career, made compromise harder at home. Neither side has ever fully explained what went wrong. In September 2012, while Dan was away on a work trip, Wendi filed for divorce. He came home to an empty house, furniture gone, boys gone, only paperwork waiting. There was no conversation, no warning. That abrupt ending set the tone for everything that followed. What could have been a civil separation instead became a prolonged legal war. The divorce was finalized in July 2013, with shared custody awarded. But that ruling settled almost nothing. Disputes over money, property, and parenting were only the beginning of a fight that would eventually consume both families for years. The real battle came over relocation. Wendi wanted to move the boys 500 miles away to be near her parents. Dan refused to give up his daily role as a father and fought the request in court. In June 2013, the judge denied the move. Dan won, but for the Adelsons, it didn't feel like a legal defeat. It felt unacceptable. Court emails later showed Donna referring to Dan in hostile terms and pushing for increasingly aggressive ways to reverse the outcome, treating the loss not as final, but as a problem still waiting to be solved. Donna reportedly offered Dan as much as $1 million, pooled from family members, in exchange for letting the boys relocate. He refused outright. Another idea that surfaced in evidence involved falsely telling Dan his sons were being raised as Christians, aimed at his faith to push him toward giving up. Though Wendi testified, she never carried it out. In early 2014, Dan filed to restrict Donna's unsupervised access to the boys. The hearing was postponed and never resolved, leaving Donna facing the possibility of losing her grandsons entirely, on top of the relocation she'd already lost. The connection between the Adelson family and hired violence ran through Catherine Magbanua, romantically tied to Wendy's brother Charlie and the mother of children with a man named Sigfredo Garcia. In June 2014, Garcia and his friend, Luis Rivera, drove from South Florida to Tallahassee to kill Dan, carrying his photo and address. They lost track of him during surveillance and turned back. Weeks later, using better information from Magbanua about Dan's upcoming flight, they returned with a rented Prius and a payment chain of roughly $100,000, moving from Charlie down to the two men. On July 18, 2014, Dan followed his normal Friday routine: preschool drop-off, the gym, the drive home. Unaware he was being trailed by the rented Prius the entire morning. Shortly before reaching his house, he mentioned to someone on the phone that he'd noticed a stranger near his driveway. Moments later, that person heard the sound of an attack. At around 11 a.m., while sitting in his car in his own garage, Dan was shot twice at close range. Nothing was stolen, nothing staged. He died from his injuries the next day at age 41. The investigation stalled for 2 years. Detectives traced the Prius and suspected Garcia and Rivera, but had nothing linking the murder to the Adelsons. That changed in 2016, when an FBI undercover operation posing as blackmail triggered a chain of panicked phone calls between Donna, Charlie, Magbanua, and Garcia. The first real evidence tying every layer together. A secretly recorded restaurant conversation between Charlie and Magbanua took years to enhance before it could be used in court. Garcia and Magbanua were arrested that year, and Rivera pleaded guilty, agreeing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. In 2019, Garcia was convicted of murder and conspiracy and sentenced to life plus 30 years, while Magbanua's trial ended in a mistrial, with a new jury finally convicting her in 2022. Charlie wasn't arrested until 2022, once enhanced audio gave prosecutors enough evidence. His defense claimed he'd been extorted, not that he'd ordered the killing. The jury rejected it, convicting him in 2023 and sentencing him to life plus 60 years. Days later, Donna was arrested at Miami International Airport, attempting to board a one-way flight to Vietnam, a country with no extradition treaty with the U.S. Donna's own trial didn't begin until summer 2025, delayed after her attorney withdrew. Over 6 days, jurors heard from 26 witnesses, including her own estranged son, who testified the family showed little curiosity about who had killed Dan. In September 2025, she was convicted of murder, conspiracy, and solicitation, receiving life without parole plus 30 years. Charlie's conviction was upheld on appeal in 2026. Donna's appeal remains pending. 5 defendants, 5 convictions, over a decade between the murder and the final verdict, leaving 2 sons who grew up without a father, while the truth slowly came out.